Eliam Henderson.
John, how are you?
Good, and you?
Good.
Welcome to the PIREP.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So you and I met at Lake Clark Air.
Yeah.
You were just a little single pilot back then.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to tell everybody what your qualifications are to...
Okay. A commercial multi and instrument rated.
Sweet. So you've since moved on to flying. You were doing a lot of flying in the right seat of the 99s at Lake Clark, and then they quit that program.
Yeah, so I started up in Alaska flying right seat in the Beech 99 with Joe, and that was through their PDP program. So I was able to do that below 500 hours, and I did that until 500 hours, and then they moved me into the 207s and the Bonanzas. And then after that, I've parted ways with Lake Clark and went over to Alaska Central Express, and now I'm flying right seat again in the 1900. So
Sweet. And how's that been going?
pretty good. It's different. You know,
Yeah.
they operate it more like a 121 than Lake Clark would,
Yeah.
which has got its pros and cons. But overall, it's nice. I get a bit on my schedule a month in advance. Trade for days, pickup days, reserve day pay. So it's just nice to know what I'm doing relatively a month previous rather than the night before.
At 9 p.m.
Yeah.
That is kind of the downside of flying non-scheduled 135. So tell me about your journey getting into aviation.
Okay.
How'd you get started?
Okay, so this goes back to when I was pretty little, actually. I was about, I'd say, 10 years old, and my dad had been working on his private to basically, I guess, understand his father a little more, who flew in the Air Force. So then he got his private and bought a little Cessna 140, and basically taking me up flying in that, I'm sorry, Cessna 140, Cessna 150. It was painted like an Aerobat. So he'd take me up flying in that, and I really loved it. And going through middle school and high school and whatnot, people would make fun of me because I wanted to be a pilot. And it wasn't until
Wait, who made fun of you?
my now fiance, Anne-Marie, would make fun of me saying that I was a pilot when I was a little kid. And now I am a pilot, so joke's on her. And we're getting married. But past that, I'd say getting into high school is when I started to think a little more seriously about what I wanted to do in life. And yeah, it was about, I'd say, junior year of high school, where I basically sat down and I said, what can I do that doesn't require a ton of work, that makes a lot of money? I go, pilot. So
Perfect.
yeah, from there, once I graduated, I'd been saving up money, working at Costco, and found a program online, Liberty University online, and they were able to basically get me my bachelor's degree and pay for all my flight school utilizing FAFSA, and saved up money. And I was able to do that still living in and out of the house to save more money, and that was at Georgetown, Texas.
Nice. So you moved up here with 250 hours?
It was probably closer to I was probably right around 370, maybe a little less, whatever you need to get your commercial, I don't remember.
Right. I think it's 250 is the minimum. But
250, and then a little bit more
Yeah.
flying my dad's 150 and
Nice.
other stuff in the multi.
Sweet. So when you came up here, did you go straight to Lake Clark? That was your first bit of flying?
Yeah, up here, well, I got my multi-engine up here, so I
Okay.
kind of had a little bit of experience with Merrill and the Part 93 deviations and stuff like that. But when I made the move, it was to go work for Lake Clark Air. I had that job when I was living in Hawaii. They said, come up in 2 months, and I sold all my stuff and moved up to Lake Clark.
Nice. And when was that?
That would have been 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
February, 2.5 years ago. Yeah.
Nice. So were you doing you were in Hawaii at that point? Were you flying?
Not in Hawaii, no. In Hawaii, I was surfing and building houses.
So you had your commercial certificate, and then you went to Hawaii to be a beach bum?
Pretty much. I think I got burned out a little bit of just all the school and paying for flying and whatnot. And then once you get your commercial, it's kind of like, okay, I've spent all this money. No one will hire me. Do I continue to rent planes for an exorbitant price, or do I buy a plane? At this point, my dad didn't have the 150 anymore. So I decided to just go be a beach bum for a while.
Nice. So you came up to Alaska. What was it like going from having flown just Texas?
Mainly just Texas. I've flown around the lower 48, back and forth, Colorado, Texas,
Gotcha.
Louisiana, kind of the lower central USA. Coming up here, it was a big change. I've had a gravel experience from Texas and Colorado and whatnot, so that wasn't a huge deal. I think it's easier to land on grass and gravel than it is paved anyway.
You don't have to be straight down the runway. You can.
You don't. Yeah, you know, if you're a little side loaded, the gravel's a little more forgiving.
Yeah.
But I'd say the biggest difference is the difference in weather. Like in the lower 48, especially Texas, you have to deal with big, massive thunderstorms or quick moving squall lines. Up here, I don't think I've heard thunder or lightning since I've been up here. Mainly up here, it's just really crappy low IFR days and freezing fog and severe icing conditions that are the main thing, and high winds.
Yeah. So what, you got into the single pilot stuff. Tell us what that was like.
That, honestly, flying single pilot's pretty awesome. You just,
Yeah.
you know, it's just you. There's nobody looking over your shoulder, which sometimes it's great to have somebody looking over your shoulder to make sure you're not doing anything that you shouldn't be. But single pilot is nice because everything's up to you. So, everything's up to you, and it's fun just to have that freedom. Like if you're doing an 8-hour day, you know, it's like, okay, you're going as far south as, I don't know, call it Chignik Lagoon, and hitting every village on the way back. It's awesome. It's freedom, you know, and the whole time it could be a pretty low overcast layer that you're just never getting above 500 or 1,000 feet the whole way down. And it's awesome.
So you've been to the Chigs, spent some time there in a single engine. I feel like there's always a story out of the Chigs.
Honestly, the Chigs, it really just depends what day you get into the Chigniks. It's usually the most turbulent ride ever. Going in there, the winds just get really rowdy back in the coves. Short, lots of birds, wildlife, and just crappy runway conditions. I mean, the DOT doesn't take care of them, and you know, you're dodging a cone at lake in the middle of the runway. At the lagoon, where lately it's just been rutted up like crazy. The guys can't plow it to save their lives. And then the bay can get kind of soft. In the Bonanzas, it's not such an issue because you're not too heavy, but in the bigger birds, it gets so soft when it's wet out there, you'll sink in and get stuck.
Yeah. So what are some bad situations you've gotten into
Bad situation
up here in Alaska?
Let me think of stuff I can say.
Okay.
I'd say, honestly, nothing too crazy. Hit a bird or two coming into the Chigs, and you know, that's not such a huge deal. You just make sure it's okay, call maintenance, and go from there. And little tiny birds, not big bird. Big bird would be a bigger issue. And then severe icing, I've had that a handful of times, and that's not fun. It's scary, especially when you're limited by the altitude you can gain versus lose. That's a big debate between pilots too, whether you should descend or climb through the icing layers. But I'd say the worst was in the 99 in the Anchorage Bowl, trying to get out and picking up severe icing. And airspeed was trickling down towards min-ice speed, couldn't maintain altitude, power was already max, couldn't climb. ATC wouldn't listen to us, they couldn't get a word in. So eventually we just did what we had to do to get out of the icing conditions, and it was fine. Once we got to a lower altitude, it burned off.
So talk us through how you make that decision whether to climb or descend with icing.
I think it's really circumstantial and depends on the situation. In something like a Bonanza, any icing is not approved, right? So you need to do whatever you can to get out of that. And you probably don't have the power to get above it anyway before you'll stall. Navajo, you have boots and a little more power. I don't know how high you can take that thing. I don't have any experience, but
not high with ice.
In the turboprops, you usually got a little more get up and go, and you're carrying a lot more speed. So, you know, say you start packing it on at, I don't know, flight level 180, it's usually isolated to a few thousand feet. And if you make that determination quick enough, you can go, hey, give me a block from 200 to 220, and just rock it up and see if it gets better. If it doesn't get better, now you have 22,000 foot of air or altitude to lose on the way down to try to find something. So it's better than being at 2,000 foot packing it on.
Yeah, that's a good point. So going up, so you still have the other type of energy, which is altitude, and you can hold on to that in hopes that you can either get above it and sublimate it, or
you have a little more time to play around with airspeed and altitude on the way down.
Yeah, exactly. So, what you've spent a lot of time both in the just flying VFR out here and as well as in the IFR system out here. Had you spent a lot of time in the IFR system in the States?
I wouldn't say a ton compared to up here at ACE, especially. We're always in the IFR system, but a fair amount down in the lower 48, just doing like long cross countries and stuff like that with friends. You pick it up, but nothing crazy down in the lower 48.
So with ACE, I know over at Lake Clark we do run into, especially in the Navajo where you're only cruising at 10 or 12,000 feet, run into a lot of dead spots across the mountains. You're not going to be on, you're probably on secondary coverage, but you're not on, you don't have radio contact with anybody.
Yeah.
Do you run into that, ACE?
A little bit, not as much as Lake Clark Air, because we can get up into the flight levels and they can reach us a little bit further, but there's still certain areas you just kind of got to know about if you're going to lose them or they forget about you.
Yeah.
And then certain approaches where they just can't hear you because of the mountains, like Dutch Harbor, you'll get into some dead spots. Right around Viniaminov, you'll get into some dead spots. And then depending on what other villages you're going to, there might be dead spots. But most places ACE will go into, we can usually grab somebody or relay through somebody to get them, which is really helpful.
Yeah, so that relaying, we do that a lot at Lake Clark, where we'll have one of our turboprops up at flight level 200 or whatever, and then several VFR and IFR planes down below, and the lower planes can't get a hold of ATC themselves, but we can relay up to the turboprops and cancel and hope that it's quick enough. Yeah. What's the AWACS? That's what Aaron calls it.
The AWACS.
Yeah,
Radio.
Calls it flying the AWACS.
Every now and then you'll get like some guys in 747s coming over from China or whatever, and you can relay up to them. I've heard them a handful of times helping folks out.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
It's really fun.
They did help me one time. I wasn't trying to cancel, but
They canceled for you?
Yeah. It worked out. So what's life like at ACE? You're running a pretty early schedule.
Yeah, so they have three main shifts, I should say, throughout the day. They have the AM shift, the swing shift, and then the PM shift. When I first got there, I was running a lot of AMs, which they also have. So they have reserve shifts for all of those, and then scheduled lines. Scheduled lines are usually UPS or USPS contracts that go every day regardless. Maybe not weekends, but most of the AMs would be to Kodiak and back was what I was doing a lot. They also have an AM line that runs from here to Cordova to Yakutat, and I think on some days they'll go back out and hit the smaller villages like Chiniga and Titlik. And then also a couple early mornings that do Ketchikan, Juneau, Sitka, and Wrangell.
Nice.
But the normal day-to-day, I guess, would be wake up at about midnight, head into work for a 1 o'clock show, and pre-flight the plane, see if the plane needs de-iced, make sure the load's right, that they're loading it to the right place, which they screw up a lot, make sure that it's within CG, get your fuel load made, making sure that you're legal to depart to the aircraft, to the airfield you're going to, making sure you have the fuel to go there, plus an alternate, plus 45 minutes, and then making sure that all works with the weight balance and CG is a big part of the mornings. And then going out, hopping in the plane, calling over the de-ice truck. That usually takes a little while, picking up clearance, taxi out, take off. And about the time you actually start moving away from ACE is when the day picks up a lot quicker. It's getting out of the Anchorage Bowl takes a while.
Yeah.
And then, you're usually back by, I don't know, if you're working the midnight run, you'll be back by, most of the days I'd be back by 8 to 10 o'clock in the morning, which was not too shabby.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm done with it, ready to party all night.
Yeah, I try to, and then I fall asleep at 5 p.m.
Oh, yeah. So you've shot the approach into Kodiak quite a few times. Tell us what that's like.
Honestly, Kodiak's, I don't know, it's a challenging approach, I guess. It's a DME arc, and it's a special approach as well.
But down.
I just hadn't flown a DME ARC in a long time. So the first time jumping back into that was kind of going right back to the instrument days of, okay, twist, time, turn, tune. But you pick it up and you figure out what you're doing. It can get gnarly in Kodiak though, because just crappy weather, snowing, icy. Also at 1 a.m, no one's out there to give you a runway report. So you got to be looking at weather from the previous day to see if it had snowed, to see if there was freezing rain, and to see when the last maintenance was done, the last FICON report. And usually it's crappy. You get out there, nobody's touched it. You're the first dummy to go out there and see what it looks like. And you're getting wind shear the whole way down on the approach, and you're hoping you see it. And I've never gone where we hadn't seen it, but I could see the missed approach being pretty gnarly because it's a 1 mile left turn, and you're trying to avoid the trees and the hills.
Yeah, you're like going into a dead end.
Yeah, it's like a boxed canyon turn essentially.
Dude. So I've noticed this a lot with Alaskan pilots that I've talked to, is that briefing the weather isn't nearly as simple as just pulling up the weather products that you have on ForeFlight. A lot of times you are going back into history. You're making calls out to the villages to get, subjective as they are, just boots on the ground reports, and you're pulling data from a lot of different unofficial places to supplement the inherently vague official products that are out there that just aren't all that great up here in Alaska.
Yeah, you run into that a lot for sure. I'd say at Lake Clark area more you rely on villager reports and having them out there on the four-wheeler. A lot of the places ACE goes are usually paved runways, and depending on the airport, a lot of them are staffed most of the time, especially if they know a big ACE bird's coming in with like priority mail. There'll be people out there. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely important to kind of interpolate all of the data you are presented with, and if you're not presented with it, knowing where to look is a big thing in Alaska. Like, I think the first couple months up here, I didn't realize that we were calling people every morning at Lake Clark. You know, that wasn't in my realm of scope. That was more of the captain's job and the people working for Lake Clark Air getting those reports, and then figuring out if you're going to trust those reports or not. Because a lot of people, you know, they either just don't know good enough or they really want their stuff. So it's like, get him in the air going, and it's either going to work out when he gets here or he's not going to land. So
right. Yeah, we were talking about I was talking about this with Chris recently. Like, sometimes you have to have a few different phone numbers to call depending on who's getting stuff that day.
Yep.
And it's like, you know, if I had some you know, big something coming in on an airplane and they were asking me how the runway conditions were,
especially when you're paying, you know, I don't know what the going rate for shipping is up here, but it's up there. It's crazy. And a lot of the stuff they're getting to is perishable goods that, you know, if they don't get it within that 2-day window, it's rotten, and they've just spent $1,000 on groceries to get out to the village, and
it's not good. Yeah, that's got to be a little bit frustrating.
It's got to be.
So what if you had a guy coming up from the States, he's got 506 hours, you know, he's just landed a job here somehow in Anchorage, what would you tell that young guy or girl?
Honestly, going back to like personal minimums and that whole story you'll hear going through all your check rides, you know, what if, especially a commercial check ride, it was a question posed to me. It's like, your boss wants you to do X, Y, and Z, and, you know, they're really pressuring you. So having hard, fast personal minimums, and they can be adjustable, you know, as you develop in your skills, you can change them, but really having a go, no-go plan and sticking to it. I mean, if you're not comfortable with something, don't do it. There's a handful of times, even flying the Bonanza, where it's like 90% of the runways you're going to are fine. You know, it might be really windy, like 30 knot plus winds, but then there's the one runway, like Pedro Bay. It's a short runway surrounded by mountains, and the winds get weird where a sock will be pointed this way at one end of the runway, and the other end of the runway it's 180 degrees the other way.
Oh yeah.
And just kind of understanding that, you know, your plane's not built for that. You don't have the power to get out of something that you don't want to be in. So knowing to not get close to that area and go, hey, that's not for me. Send a bigger plane. Send somebody else. I'm not doing it. Right.
So how did you develop personal minimums? Did you have a list when you came up here, and then you?
So yeah, I believe it was. I think it's on Sporties. They sell, or you can print out like a brochure, and it's like the I'm Safe checklist and whatnot.
Yeah.
And you go through, and I've had that, going through all my check rides and whatnot, and developing as a pilot, and coming up here. I would hold myself to that, especially when I was flying by myself. But a big point to help improve that was flying with other more experienced people that have been up here for a couple of years doing it, and learning from them and having them to not necessarily rely on, but to use their skills and knowledge to help you learn more was a big help. I mean, flying with literally anyone at Lake Clark Air is really skilled. I mean, Chris, Joe, Lilu. I haven't flown with her myself, but
she's
good from everything
got
I've
it,
heard.
yeah.
And senior's been doing it for years up here, and take what you will from him, but he hasn't ever died, so he's doing something.
yeah, exactly. And so you're learning the techniques off of the guys you can, and then using that to refine your personal minimums as you go. Were there any times where you were kind of on the fence and you went for it? And
let me think. Yeah, there's a handful of mornings out in the Anchorage Bowl. So I remember one morning, it's always getting through the pass in a single engine plane is the issue. So we usually depart out of Merrill, and you kind of follow that coastline down to Lake Clark Pass. But
yeah, I was just going to say Lake Clark Pass.
Yeah, and and there's a handful of passes too. That's the main one we use, but there's other passes you can use as well depending on where you're going. And up here we use weather cameras a lot to get accurate data on what's currently happening in the area you're about to go to. And there's a high and low camera on the pass, and you kind of get a pretty good idea of what it's doing, whether the clouds are all the way down to the ground or if it's a high overcast layer where you can go underneath them. And there's a handful of times where, I'll see what's going on all the way over to the pass, and it's like, okay, that's doable. I can at least get to Port Allsworth, and then you fire up and go, and you get there, and it's closed in on you. So then you just turn around, and nobody's happy, but you turn around and land at Merrill. And there's other times where I think it's good, and then I taxi out to take off, and somehow just everything's blown in, and you look across the inlet, and you're like, there's no way I'm going over into that. That's crazy.
Yeah. So just continually reassessing.
Oh, all the time.
And not sticking to that.
Having a plan A, B, C, all the way through Z is a good idea.
Yeah. Have you had any major equipment malfunctions or?
Not necessarily major. So in the 1900 we have a QRH for master warnings, master caution items, and flying in Alaska, there's the temperature is a big factor in anything that's mechanical. It breaks all the time. But I'd say the biggest things would just be like bleed air failures, environmental failures, things like that, which you shouldn't, I shouldn't say are not a big deal. It's still a warning item. Then you run the checklist and make sure everything's okay. But no engine failures, no fires, no nothing like that.
Gotcha. Speaking of the temperature, how do you prepare yourself for the lower temperatures that we deal with around here? What's in your flight bag? What do you?
Being prepared for anything's really good. It's taken me a while to refine coming from Texas, dealing with the cold weather. So I was just cold the first year straight. I'm still always cold. I run cold, but learning how to layer properly, learning what you actually need to have on you. You always have to be prepared to spend the night somewhere. Not saying you will, but not wearing Crocs flying is a good idea. Having some kind of insulated boot on, good socks, wool socks, base layers, mid layers, top layers. And it's tough too when you're doing the longer flights, like down to Dutch or Ketchikan, where it is more of a like a coastal climate, where there's not as much snow or there's more wind or you name it. So it gets hard and challenging to prepare for that when you're layered up for 1 degree weather in Anchorage, and then you go down to Ketchikan and it's 30 degrees and you're unloading 5,000 pounds and you're hot, right? And then in my flight bag in particular, I carry a lot of things. So when I was at Lake Clark Air, we would carry Garmin for the SOS function and the text messaging function. At Lake Clark or at Ace, I don't carry your Garmin anymore. Every phone has the SOS satellite in it, so I can always send something to the emergency authorities with that. Going more into that, I guess, is, carrying a small survival kit in my bag's always in there, knife, flashlight, things of that nature. All the planes have big survival bags in them as well.
Right.
And then just like the essentials, Advil, medicine, throw up bags, piss bags, and just being prepared. Hand warmers is a big thing. I always have a stack of hand warmers in my bag for me or other people.
Yeah.
Those are the big things I'd say.
Yeah. I've heard it, the survival gear that's in your airplane is super nice, and often comes with quite a bit, including 20,000 calories or some survival food of some sort. But I've heard it put this way, like your survival gear is what's on you. That's camping gear.
Oh yeah, I agree. And a lot of people haven't even opened up that bag. I would recommend anybody that's flying up here to actually open up the company provided bag and look what's in there.
Yeah.
To just make sure you understand if you end up in the middle of nowhere and it's crappy weather for 2 days where nobody's coming to get you. It's you'll probably make it, but if you don't know how to build a quick shelter or something like that to get out of the cold, it's not going to be fun.
Yeah.
And then it kind of just depends on your mission, I'd say. If you're flying corporate or cargo or on demand, you have the minimum legalities, and then you have going above and beyond versus, some guy in a 185 is running the Iditarod with the teams or going fishing with his family. That's a different case-by-case need.
Yeah.
Where I would pack a lot more,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, single engine out there on the tundra.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of want to edit your bag for your mission.
Oh yeah. Versus multis. I mean, at least you have one more engine to put it a little further.
Yeah, a few minutes further.
Yeah.
So what's on the horizon for you? You looking to stay in Alaska long term? Are you?
Yeah, I don't, it changes all the time, and I think that's just the nature of the business. I really like Alaska. Anne-Marie really likes Alaska, my fiance. And I don't have any immediate plans of going anywhere. Obviously, it would be nice to go somewhere that you don't have to work a lot, you make a lot of money. But nobody's really hiring right now.
But the early childhood calculation.
Yeah. But it's enjoyable. I like doing what I'm doing now, where I have a schedule. I'm home every night.
Yeah.
For the most part. I mean, I've never gotten stuck anywhere, knock on wood, but a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Versus going to fly for an Atlas or a Kalita or something like that, where you're gone for 2 weeks at a time.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd enjoy that anymore at this stage in life. I think I would want to do something that's like an out and back, or like Sun Country does out and backs to Minneapolis.
Yep.
Or just staying at like a smaller 135. I enjoy.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, everybody in flight school talked about working for UPS or working for Atlas and making the big bucks and not having to deal with passengers. But dude, just being home every night.
Yeah.
I love the flying, and then I get to come home and I get to see my family. And
it's good for your mental health, your psyche, and going through time zones and not ever getting to catch up on a normal rhythm of sleep. I mean, it takes years off your life, and people don't realize that.
Yeah. So what about personal airplanes? You got a personal airplane on the horizon?
I'd like to get a lot of planes, but
yeah.
I'd say one day a dream plane. Again, it depends on the mission. Up here, 185's like the gold standard, but they cost a lot of money. When I was younger, I really enjoyed Lance Airs and Class Airs because they burn practically no fuel. You can't carry any weight with you, but they go fast and they go far. So I think it just depends where I'm living and how much money I want to just flush down the toilet every year. But a 185.
Yeah, those are sweet little birds all over here. Have you gone to a lot of the? Have you gone out to the fly-in? Where is it at?
There's a couple.
The Stoll fly-in? No. Valdez, yeah.
I haven't gone out there myself. I've seen lots of videos of it. That would be cool. That'd probably be something we'll have to do this year.
Yeah.
But no, I've done all sorts of other things. I mean, when I first moved up here, I lived with one of the guys I actually learned from when I was going through flight school. His name's John as well. But getting to go up there and fly with him, it was really awesome. Riley is another great guy up here that's taking me around the Canuck, and getting to do fun stuff with them in the backcountry it's nice to do something that's not work, to just play around.
Dude, it is. Like, I rarely rent anymore, but when I do, it is kind of nice that it's like, oh, it's just whatever I want to do.
Yep.
As long as I'm willing to pay.
No real time schedule. You're like, okay, I'm gonna go look at that iceberg, and then I'm
Yeah.
gonna go look at that glacier.
Exactly, yeah. And it's so beautiful, dude. Especially like, you get up toward Palmer.
Oh, man.
And it's just like, that's where I did my multi.
Beautiful.
Out at Palmer, and I got distracted every time I took off.
Mhm.
Be like, oh, okay.
Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah.
No, the whole mountain range right there. I always tell people Anchorage is like an hour away from the rest of Alaska,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
It's the Bud Light version of Alaska.
Yeah, no, Anchorage is cool, don't get me wrong, but it's
Yeah.
like, if you have a plane, within 20 minutes of taking off, you're in the most pristine winter wonderland or summer wonderland you can imagine. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's wild. It really is the way to see the state.
Mm-hmm.
Eliam Henderson,
Thank you, John.
thanks so much for coming on the PIREP.
Yeah.